What's going on, everyone? I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. Today, I'm very excited to be featuring my extended interview with former congressman and three-time presidential candidate, Dr. Ron Paul, where we discuss everything from the new war in Syria to being marginalized in the mainstream media. Stick around, you don't want to miss it. Now let's break the set.
Speculation has been replacing hard fact.
Terrorists don't read Twitter.
Who's right and who's wrong?
It was a terrible thing to say, period.
The mistake entirely on me.
What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw. These words are hard hitting, you're watching your neck, but you need to tune in because we're breaking the set.
One of the biggest advocates for economic reform in America has been former Congressman Ron Paul. In fact, Ron Paul made transparency over monetary policy one of the central tenets of his campaign, not only calling to audit the Federal Reserve, but to abolish it altogether. Well, 6 years after Dr. Paul first introduced legislation to audit the Fed, his efforts seem to have paid off as Congress finally approved a bill to shed some light on the activities of this elusive banking institution. Of course, U.S. airstrikes on ISIS targets in Iraq and now Syria have effectively diverted the nation's attention away from domestic issues. And considering how wildly popular Dr. Paul has been in his foreign policy views, I invited him on the show to have an in-depth discussion about what's unfolding in the Middle East. I first asked him if he thinks the latest bombing campaign in Syria is legal under U.S. and international law.
No, absolutely not. It's not legal under international law, which is important, but I don't hang my hat on everything on international law as much as I do on our laws, our Constitution, our laws, and I would say the whole mess that we've been involved in the Middle East have been technically illegal because we've initiated war, but we haven't declared war. So, yes, this expansion of the war, a matter of fact, it's immoral in the sense that our president, wanted to wind these wars down. He was going to finish the war in Iraq, and here it is expanding it massively, not only in Iraq, but up into Syria. So I consider what's going on now specifically in these last few weeks, I consider it totally immoral. I think it's illegal under our laws and illegal under the international law as well.
It's fascinating to hear him kind of double down on that Bush doctrine logic, the preemptive war doctrine there, Congressman. And I wanted to play a clip of Obama speaking at the UN General Assembly this week. Here's what he had to say about ISIS.
No God condones this terror. No grievance justifies these actions. There can be no reasoning, no negotiation with this brand of evil. The only language understood by killers like this is the language of force. So the United States of America will work with a broad coalition to dismantle this network of death.
What's your response to Obama saying the only way to deal with ISIS is military force?
Well, I think that is going to be an attractive statement. A lot of people are going to say absolutely because all they see is what's on the surface, and there's a lot of nasty people out there wanting to kill. But from my approach, we have to do a little bit more than just address the violence that is occurring. But why is there violence? What cause of violence? Why do we have it? Could we make it worse? Will there be more violence? And my argument is everything that we do there increase the amount of violence. And because they are vicious and nasty and they're killing people, they are reacting. I think that everybody, who are directly involved, have a right to think about it and deal with it. If we had that going on in our country, we would deal with it. And I think the people there should deal with it. We're talking, we don't know exactly how many, but the numbers are pretty significant, into the thousands, 20 or 30,000 people, a significant amount, but their success is rather amazing of what's going on. And but what about the people around there that are complaining? I don't know if any government is saying, we love ISIS and we want to support them and we're doing this, and that includes millions of people. So I would say, you know, they're responsible to deal with this. If you need a coalition, let it come together. But why should somebody from 6,000 miles away that has been stirring this pot for so long be the group that's going to bring everybody together and organize the fight? So if they're a true threat in the region, the people in the region ought to deal with it. And I would think that if you had a coalition over there, which would be more natural, maybe Israel would even want to help out. But I think the United States should stay out of it. I think we've instigated too much of it, and the sooner we come home, the better.
Right. Why do you think we never hear about Israel's policy on ISIS, or Syria for that matter?
It seems like it's logical. You know, we don't have even treaties with Israel, and yet everybody knows, you know, exactly our relationship with them. But I think and ultimately, I think the relationship we have is very harmful to Israel because they're totally dependent on us. If they were less dependent on us, I think there would be more natural coalitions built in over there, and they would work with their neighbors a little bit better. But as long as there's an assumption that we will always be there to take care of any problems, I think that doesn't encourage them to develop some of the relationships that would be much better. And I think when there's problems like this, I don't know why they couldn't have cooperated with other regional people, that is Israel, to deal with Saddam Hussein if he was a real threat, you know. But it turned out that the lies told to the American people about Saddam Hussein turned out to be, you know, all a bunch of lies. So I would say that the less we do, the more incentive that all the countries in the region would deal with this if indeed they consider it a threat. When they don't do anything, it must mean they're not staying up overnight, but where the system, you know, stirs up so much fear in our country. We have people in this country staying up late at night. What are we going to do about this? You know, I think they should stay up late at night, and that's the reason I'd like to see our men come home from the region.
Right. We can't keep acting as the Air Force for every single country whenever they ask us to, Congressman. We have more than enough problems here at home, and of course the mainstream media is fear-mongering us incessantly all day yesterday. I thought there was going to be a terrorist attack in New York City. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And why do you think we hear this bellicose rhetoric? I mean, you know this more than anyone else, Congressman, because, of course, you were put in the middle of this, where you have the establishment basically pushing us, giving us two options, this false dichotomy, either arm rebels or bomb people. I mean, why is it that those are the two options when it comes to solving problems in the Middle East?
Well, yeah, they are bellicose, and you're right about that. They must have an incentive. I do not believe it's they're concerned about the defense of America, you know, because right now they're saying they've changed the definition of imminent. If they are imminently plotting to do something against somebody any place in the world, that's the same as a true imminent threat to us. So they have to stir up the fear. The people have to be fearful and hateful. They did this, you know, before the Persian Gulf War as well as the Iraq War, on all the horrible things that would come about. But their motivations are only they could explain them. But there's probably quite a few. I think that some people like to sell a lot of weapons. The other day when I saw the first primary responsibility of our Air Force when they went back in there was to break up all the American weaponry. And I thought, well, I guess the military-industrial complex will like that. You know, we were putting weapons into Syria, you know, some of the rebels as well as Iraq, and it ended up in the hands of ISIS. So we have to go in and blow them up if we're going to do anything. So it makes no sense unless those people back here, hey, we get to build these weapons again. But there are some other motivations too. It used to be oil was the big issue, and world power, and you know, there are so many things that exist that I guess every individual has a variety of different reasons why they think we should be there.
Let's talk about isolationism, because, of course, when you talk about these kind of things, people call you an isolationist. What's the difference between isolationism and non-interventionism?
Well, isolationism is when we isolate other countries. We isolate Russia by putting on sanctions. We isolated Cuba for many years. We isolated with sanctions and bombs the government of Iraq as well as Iran. We've isolated them. So that to me is isolation in the worst sense of the term. Non-intervention means we get along with people. Anybody who wants to be friendly, if it's honest friendship, we should be friends and we should trade with them and not have entangling alliances, as our founders, advised. So isolationism is very, very negative when we do it to other people. But this idea that I am the is rather bizarre, because I never endorse sanctions and I never endorse tariffs or anything else. I want to be able to go to Cuba and different places, because I believe that the more you trade and talk to people, the better off we'll be. This is why I've been disturbed by this setback with Russia right now, and as well as I've always been quite satisfied since the 70s because when I was in high school, we were fighting the communist Chinese. But after that, then Nixon took this bold step, and we started trading. And we do get along with China a lot better. So I was disappointed to see the setback right now over Ukraine, because I thought the motivation for trade would override it, and hopefully it'll still play a role in restraint, on what both countries do, and that we go back to talking and trading with people.
Right. I mean, it is very disappointing, Congressman. When you were running for president, you made the most sense among the candidates, because, I think a lot of people can agree with me here, because when it came to foreign policy, you just laid it all out. You talked about blowback. You talked about everything basically that we're seeing now. You were routinely smeared for it. I wanted to play a clip of an exchange between Bill O'Reilly and Glenn Beck on Fox about you.
Ron Paul needs to shh on foreign policy. Shh. Keep that to yourself. You sound a little like Osama bin Laden at times. It's not America's fault. Have we played a role in making things worse? Have we helped them in recruiting? Yeah, I think we have with some of the things. But it's not America's fault. And I don't think Ron gets that.
No, he doesn't get it. And he hasn't ever gotten it. And he never will get it. So we're going to discount him.
Interesting, because here's Glenn Beck, who basically hijacked your ideals in the Tea Party in 2008 and took them and kind of ran with them, except embraced this really hard-hitting military solution there. Doctor, why do you think, that they said this? What's your response to this kind of total dismissal of your views?
Well, they do this, of course, because they're representing the establishment. But the people themselves, I remember on some of those confrontations, the one with Giuliani, the establishment, everybody in the media, came down hard on me, except it was an explosion of interest in anybody that was under 25, because they thought it made a lot of good sense. They just can't stand to hear the truth. I know one time O'Reilly said that I should never refer to history. We don't want to hear about history. We just have to talk about now, because now they say that if I say something that, sort of explains things, then they say, well, you're un-American. Well, blame America first. But I don't blame America. I know there's a lot of good people in America, and I don't blame any American in particular, but I do blame foreign policy of our government. And that's quite a bit different than saying that, I'm unpatriotic, I don't like the military. That was the other thing. I was unpatriotic and I didn't defend the military, and yet it turned out that the military supported me over all the other candidates. So it's just demagoguery, and they're just, I don't know whether they do it out of total ignorance or they have a sinister motivation, but on the long term, I think the American people aren't anxious to go into another war. That's why I get a little bit disappointed when the war propagandists come back. A year ago, we made sense, and we were able to put pressure on the president not going into Syria, but all of a sudden, a lot of clamor, and public opinion has shifted. But I still think the numbers are on our side. People aren't looking for another war, and hopefully our voices can be heard.
We have to take a short break, but stick around for part 2 of my exclusive interview with Congressman Ron Paul.
Are you like me? Do you want your comedy news with some teeth? Want your comedy news to be a bare-fisted, no-holds-barred fight to the death? like a truth vampire biting into the necks of the corporate elite and the billionaire freaks while they're going, make it stop! Well, that's what you get with my new show, Redacted Tonight.
Was that too much? I think that was too much.
What are your thoughts on what's been going on in Washington?
Well, it's a mess, Larry. I mean, the whole country is being scoffed at and laughed at.
Enough is enough.
The media, the candidates, the corporatocracy, covering issues that actually affect you and me doesn't do too much for ad revenue.
Biotech agriculture giant takes on a 76-year-old American farmer based in Indiana.
How much fallout do you think this is going to create for the CIA?
Do you think this is what's triggering the crisis?
America's the largest economy in the world. It's also the largest debtor nation in the history of the world.
Breaking the set is mostly about alternatives to the status quo, but one that gave real alternatives a voice.
One minute they were working toward the American dream, the next they were just trying to survive the night. It's time for Americans and lawmakers in Washington to wake up and start talking about the real causes of poverty in America.
You know that guy who wishes someone would spy on him? How about the woman who enjoys being lied to by her government? This citizen can't get enough congressional inaction, and this taxpayer wants the mainstream media to be more corporatized. While this person would rather eat genetically modified food, this one thinks our prisons are not crowded enough. And what do these people have in common? They don't exist.
Over the years, Dr. Ron Paul has been one of the most vocal advocates for limited government, lower taxes, and a less intrusive foreign policy. These ideals helped establish the original Tea Party, which began as a grassroots movement but was quickly co-opted by the establishment Republican Party. Taking this into consideration, I asked Dr. Paul what he thought of the political hijacking of this message.
One should expect this. So if they see a movement that is galvanizing and that they can't get rid of the movement, then they have to infiltrate it and modify it. So you're absolutely right, because the first Tea Party meetings and occurred during our campaign, the big fundraiser on the original Tea Party Day anniversary. But it is true, the Republicans moved in and it became an arm of the Republican Party. But that doesn't mean that there's still not a lot of young people out there feeling this way. It's just not, and a lot of people in the Tea Party movement still would feel this way, and they don't quite realize what's happening. But if you take what's happening, in our organizations, we have a large number like Campaign for Liberty, and how about Young Americans for Liberty? That is doing fantastically on our campuses, and they know the difference, and they're not going to be cowed into, giving up on any of these beliefs. I heard so often in the campaign they'd come and say, "Ron, we really love you because you have good policies. You're a fiscal conservative, and we like your talk of liberty and the Constitution. But please change your foreign policy. It's your foreign policy that's so bad." So I would go to the campuses and I would tell them that story, and I said, then I would sort of try to get their reaction. Do you think I should change my foreign policy? And of course not, because the foreign policy is what brought them out. That's what made them enthusiastic, but they knew the difference very clearly. So, and I'm still going to the college campus. Yeah.
Exactly. We know what's going on, Congressman. Prolific journalist Nafiz Ahmed has made the point as well. Of course, in a recent article titled "How the West Created the Islamic State," he outlines how ISIS is a direct consequence of the neocon vision of imperial bloodlust over in that region. How has this happened, and do you agree with that premise?
Absolutely, and that's why it's sort of like if you have a financial crisis because you spend too much, borrow too much, and print too much, you don't find the answer in doing the same thing over and again. So if you have people who hate us and want to kill us and will travel over here to try to kill us because they see us as occupiers and crusaders and haven't killed a lot of their people, well, what is the answer? Just kill more? And think it's going to go away. Of course, they tried to propagandize, and Obama kept saying, you know, Al-Qaeda, they've been dispersed, there's hardly anybody left. It may be true, that organization dispersed, but something even more radical pops up, and that's ISIS. So that is, you have to look at cause and effect. And I'm convinced of it. I'm convinced of the notion of blowback. These things come back to haunt us. There's always unintended consequences. So many people who do support these policies that I think are so wrong, most of them do it with good intentions. They get cowed into it thinking, oh, if I don't do that, I'm not supporting the military and I'm not patriotic and this sort of thing. So they go along. But others have ulterior motives, and to me, they go against what America stands for.
And of course, the U.S. has built this coalition of Arab states to join in these strikes, including Saudi Arabia. This is a country that beheads people regularly for things like sorcery. It's helped embolden ISIS. Why does the U.S. turn a blind eye to the fact that its partner in this new war front is one of the main financiers of terrorism?
Well, I think we made that promise to do it, and we always fulfill our promises. You know, Roosevelt promised, don't sweat it, do what you want, we'll protect your kingdoms, you just send us the oil and make a good price of it. And so that's been existing for a long time. But just think, I mean, the horrors of ISIS is pretty bad. Even though we don't have all the information about the beheadings, the recent beheadings and what happened and how much was propaganda or what. But yes, there's a lot of violence there. But you know, the same week that there were supposedly 2 beheadings in Iraq, there was like 12 or 15 in Saudi Arabia, and they've been radicalized. And we actually paid to radicalize some of them when we wanted bin Laden to be a radical, because to us it was in opposition to communists, and those communists are going to take over the world, and it'll be on our doorstep. So we didn't hesitate. It was policy, and even those individuals who promoted that policy back then said it was a good idea, even though it changed and actually was turned against us. But no, I think we treat Saudi Arabia in a special manner. You know, if they use as an excuse for us to be over there still, well, we got the authority after 9/11, which says you can go after anybody who was responsible for 9/11. Well, believe me, the people we're trying to kill right now and the people involved had nothing to do with 9/11. But 15, you know, of the 19 were Saudi Arabians, and yet some of the Saudis who were in our country on 9/11 and 9/12, they got a free ride. They got in their airplanes and they got out of town. They weren't even questioned by the FBI. So you're right to infer that Saudi is treated differently, and it's obviously done for a motivation dealing with a lot of different things. You know, the control of countries, a friendly dictator we take care of, and at the origination of that policy, it was to protect the oil for the benefit of America getting cheap oil.
Well, I find this the most outrageous part of all, because here you have 9/11, which is still the basis of much of the U.S.'s foreign policy. It's still used to fearmonger us on a daily basis. The fact that Saudi Arabia, government officials were actually linked to funding these hijackers, Congressman. I mean, you've emphasized the need to declassify those 28 pages of the joint inquiry into intelligence community activities before and after the terrorist attacks of September 2001. What do you think these pages expose, and why are they still classified? Obama promised to declassify them years ago.
Of course, I can't tell you for sure because I haven't seen them. I've talked to the people who are promoting getting those pages declassified, and the only hints that we have been able to get is the fact that it indicts, you know, the Saudis. And our government must think it's very important that we think favorably about the Saudis, because we have been partners in crimes with them for so long that they're not going to allow that to happen. But, you know, the momentum is building on that, and in spite of all our problems, every once in a while something breaks through and we do get the information out, but it's still a struggle. It's such a tragedy of what's happening in this country because, you know, our Fourth Amendment is supposed to protect our privacy, but look at what NSA does to our privacy. We have no privacy, and governments are supposed to be open, but no, we have secrecy of government and no privacy for the people, and that needs to be turned around.
Right, and I know that you've brought up kind of those dozens of presidential daily briefings, the numerous intelligence reports to the highest echelons of the community. But of course, you're lambasted as a conspiracy theorist, a tinfoil hat, where if you just simply bring up these facts, I mean, these are sitting congressmen talking about these 28 pages. Congressman, why is this such a third rail?
Well, again, it probably varies. Some people are totally ignorant, and some people totally want to protect the state. You know, the liberal progressive protects the state, so they don't want the state to be challenged. It's almost like the state becomes, you know, the source of truth. So they don't want anything to knock down the state. But I have made the statement, which I firmly believe in, that truth becomes treason and an empire lies. You know, empires are built on lies. And if you point out the lies, you're challenging the empire. And, you know, in a total authoritarian state, you know, if you're in North Korea, you challenge it and you get shot the next day or something. But even in our society, if you challenge it, you can be chopped to pieces pretty much with a media that's totally controlled and a government that won't listen to the exposure of what's happening. So I think that's the most important thing that we can do, is have exposure, and that is why our pretense that we protect whistleblowers ought to be explained, because I think whistleblowers should be explained, and yet they become, they are said to be treasonous because they have told us and revealed information that shows that our government has acted illegally. Look at how much trouble it was for us to find out about how the Vietnam War got started. And of course, the lies have been exposed about the Iraq War. It still is not enough to wake up all the American people and say, enough is enough, we don't want to hear about this anymore, and insist that we bring our troops home.
I can't let you go without asking you a question about your son. Of course, him and I had a little bit of a run-in when I asked him about his endorsement for Mitt Romney. I hope there's no more bad blood there between us, but he's made enormous headway in the Senate. Many are pegging him to be a front-runner in the 2016 presidential elections. His beliefs stand at odds with yours, especially when it comes to foreign policy. Why do you think he has such radically different views on Israel and endorsed a more bellicose foreign policy than you did?
Well, it's one question you could have skipped out, because I don't talk about the differences. I don't talk about his campaign because you know, he should answer those questions. So I prefer not to get involved in that debate. All I know is his views are closer to mine than anybody else I know in the U.S. Senate.
Fair enough. Congressman Ron Paul, thank you so much for taking the time. Amazing to have you on.
Good to be with you.
Thanks so much for watching, you guys. Be sure to follow me on Twitter @AbbyMartin. Check out the full interview on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/breakingtheset. Join me again next week when I break the set all over again.
Yeah, I take your prisoners, you call it aggressive, but all I see is lies coming out in your message. I keep it audacious, speaking the facts. We break the paradigm with truth intact. The people don't need